My Faith Votes helped change the outcome of the last election by uniting Christians to get out and cast their votes. Now, we need your help to stay vigilant in the fight for our religious freedom. Visit onevote.myfaithvotes.org right now, and as a thank you for your donation, we will send you a free copy of founding honorary chairman Dr. Ben Carson's book, One Vote. This easy-to-read book will teach you the true power of the ballot. Help us activate Christians to get involved and make our voices heard. Do it today.
Hi, this is John Stenberger with the Florida Family Policy Council. We have an opportunity this November to do something that's extraordinary, which most of the world could only dream of doing. We get to actually vote. We get to actually participate in the process of picking our leaders. That's something else the world would love to do and just can't do. It's an extraordinary responsibility, and it's a stewardship issue. We have to make the best choices possible. I know a lot of people are frustrated, but we just need to look at the facts, make the best choice possible, and then just trust in God for the result. And we have great information online at flfamily.org. We have voter guides, we have information where you can compare the candidates in all the races. Thank you and God bless you, and vote your values on November 8th, 2016. Well, good evening, and welcome to our forum, an honest discussion about a difficult election. My name is John Stenberger, and I have the privilege of serving as the President and General Counsel of the Florida Family Policy Council. We are one of 38 state-based policy organizations, very similar to Family Research Council in Washington, D.C., only focusing on policy issues and cultural issues here in the state of Florida. Our primary focus is on advocating issues related to life, marriage, family, and religious liberty. We believe that if you can get marriage and family structures right, you are solving so many other problems, public policy problems, if you can get those structures right. If you're listening via Facebook Live or the myfaithvotes.com site for live stream, you can go to Citizen Link, or actually it's now called Family Policy Alliance, if we could get that back up, familypolicyalliance.com. And Family Policy Alliance is kind of the umbrella group that we are associated with Focus on the Family. We're also associated with Family Policy Alliance, formerly known as Citizen Link. So folks from other states other than Florida can go there and find the other 38 policy councils and find out other information as well. We're very pleased to have this event co-sponsored by My Faith Votes. And let me draw your attention now to the screen for a brief video by the My Faith Votes National Chairman, Dr. Ben Carson.
This November, we are facing what may be the most important election in our lifetime, if not ever. The slate of choices we have could not be more varied or more important. You know, as Christians, the Bible calls us to be salt and light to influence our culture. That starts with the choices we make in the voting booth. Today we are facing an all-out attack on our religious freedom. Laws are being passed both here and across the globe that continue to erode our rights to share the gospel and to live our lives according to the Bible. And courts are now ruling that laws that have protected our churches and businesses for decades are unconstitutional. If we don't turn things around soon, the America we have grown up with will be gone, right along with our freedoms. This November, cast your vote from a biblical worldview, and together we can turn America around. Make the pledge to vote. Visit myfaithvotes.org today.
Very short period of time, My Faith Votes has been able to reach millions of Christians around the country who may not otherwise have been a voter. They just launched an amazing new website this weekend, which is very great with resources for churches and individuals, as well as even college students from universities and other young people. They're a great source of information you can trust that is nonpartisan, that is strictly looking at the issues. Now, My Faith Votes isn't going anywhere after the election. They're actually going to be known as My Faith Matters, and they're going to be very engaged in policy work and all three branches of government and trying to protect religious freedom and also laying the groundwork for future elections, again, serving us with information. We're very grateful also for our final co-sponsor, and that is LifeBridge Church. LifeBridge Church right here in Windermere, Florida, outside of Orlando. their elders and some strategic members are the reason that we're here. Just weeks ago, they had lunch with me and said to me this question. They asked me, what can we do to make a difference? Well, if you know anything about me, if you ever ask my staff, when you ask that question in front of me, you better hang on because you're in for a ride. So we're going to have a great time tonight. So we're here today because of the leadership of LifeBridge leadership in their church. So before we go any further, I'm going to ask Johnny Scott, the executive pastor of LifeBridge, to come up and please give a word of prayer and ask the Lord to bless our event today.
We want to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here with the Florida Family Policy Council. I remember that lunch we had. It was actually Mickey Pittman that said that. Mickey said, I don't want to wake up sometime in late November and wish we could have done something. And so we're excited to have this event here, and we just want to begin by praying. Would you do that with me? Would you bow and pray with me? Father God in heaven, we come tonight glad. We come tonight glad because you are sovereign. And when we stop and acknowledge that, we just want to praise you. So we come praising you at the beginning of this forum tonight for the kind of God you are. Because you made us in your image, you made us as thinking beings and equipped us to be able to do that. And so we're also thankful for that. And not only have you sent your son to save us forever to be with you, but we get to participate with you in your kingdom now. What fun, what joy. And so help us tonight as we do that. Pour wisdom down on us as we are ambassadors for you. And salt and light has been a theme for this day off of so many people's lips. And so we thank you that we get to be that in this community here in Orlando, salt and light. And so we begin this evening, Jesus, by saying thank you for who you are. It's in your name we pray and begin. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Scott. Now, if you would please stand with me, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm going to ask 15-year-old Shiloh Dragon of Generation Joshua in Brevard County to please come and lead us in the pledge.
Thank you for standing with me and pledging to the world's greatest country, the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
How about a hand for Shiloh? So before we start the program, I want to encourage you to tweet and Facebook and take photographs and to post and to help us promote hashtag Pray, Think, Vote. And we'll be sure to consider that question. A brief word on our format. This is perhaps one of the most emotional and controversial elections of the last century, if not in American history. We are living in dark and desperate times as Christians, and the stakes are very high for the future of our country. They're even higher, however, for our Christian witness and for how the world perceives our advocacy and the gospel. But on the other hand, being misunderstood is never a substitute for doing the right thing. So this is not a debate per se. However, it is a discussion, hopefully a thoughtful discussion. Hopefully it bears nothing resembling a Jerry Springer show. Hopefully there will be no chairs flying anywhere. But there will be sharp disagreement, and you will hear different viewpoints tonight expressed. If you're committed to hashtag Never Trump, or a person that is totally convinced that Donald Trump will make America great again, then this forum might get under your skin a little bit. However, if you're here genuinely frustrated, confused, not really sure what to do on November 8th, or when early vote's starting before that, then you are in the right place tonight. Because we want to help you think through this process with seeing various viewpoints. I'd like a discussion to be candid, panelists, without spin, if that is at all possible in a political forum, and collegial, that is respecting everyone's viewpoints, even those that we may vigorously disagree with. Now, at the end of the three panelists' presentations, and my questioning them after their presentation, we're going to have some questions from the floor, and then we're going to open up questions from social media as well toward the end before I have some closing comments. Whoever wins this election, there's going to be a lot of people that are upset, both Democrat and Republican, Americans at large, and Christians. The temptation will be to point fingers, to charge each other, saying you should have did this back then, you should have did that, or we wouldn't be here, et cetera, et cetera. One thing's for sure, whoever wins the election, America is still in desperate need of responsible Christian leadership and influence in politics. No question about it. Whoever wins the election, we're still in need to pray for God's mercy and blessing on whoever becomes president. And this will be a challenging thing to do, whoever becomes president. Whoever wins, we must continue to pursue the unity of the body of Christ for the advancement of the gospel. These are things which are much more important than even the election before us. Now, in this election, there's really only logically 4 options, unless you want to think one I haven't thought of. But number 1, you can choose not to vote at all and just say, I don't like the choices, and either not vote in the top of the race or not vote at all at the ballot box. Number 2, you can vote for president for Hillary Clinton. Number 3, you can vote for Donald Trump. And number 4, you can vote for a third-party candidate. In many states, in varying states there'll be different rules, but in various states you'll have the opportunity to vote for one or more of a third-party candidate or a write-in candidate. And we will explore all 4 of these options tonight with our panelists. So without any further ado, let me go right to our panelists now. First is Dr. Clayton Cloer, who is right here in Orlando, Florida. He is senior pastor of Church of the Cross, formerly known as First Baptist of Central Florida. He grew up in Pickens, South Carolina, been married to Linda for 26 years. He has 2 grown sons. Church of the Cross is a very racially diverse church. He has the privilege of being the pastor of Congressman Dan Webster for many years, a dear friend of ours. Dr. Cloer has a bachelor's degree in business management from Clemson, an MDiv and a PhD in missiology from Mid-American Baptist Theological Seminary. He's been on more than 20 mission trips to China, Yemen, Israel, Thailand, and Laos in order to evangelize and train pastors. And very dear to my heart, he organized pastors during the 2008 campaign to define marriage between one man and a woman here in Florida. Bob Vander Plaats is, for lack of a better word, the John Stemberger of the state of Iowa. He runs the Family Leader, which is the Family Policy Council in Iowa. He's the author of Light from Lucas, where he talks about the account of his son Lucas, who was born with a very severe disability. Bob ran for governor, actually, of Iowa in 2010 and became very, very short, missed that mark, but God had another plan for him to lead in this capacity. Bob is, in my judgment, and he's probably going to cringe at me saying this, is one of the most influential persons in Iowa politics. The Miami Herald once called me one of the most influential men you've never heard of. That's really true about Bob. When Rick Santorum was at 0%, Bob had a small coalition of leaders around the country, endorsed Rick Santorum, and brought him to literally win the Iowa primary. So Bob is a very significant player in American presidential politics because of his overly important geography and real estate that he lives in. Him and his wife Darla have been married for 33 years, and they have 4 sons. Bill Witcherman has served as special assistant to President George W. Bush in the White House. He was the president's personal liaison to the conservative movement and to Christians. Before serving in the White House, he served on several senior staff-level positions on Capitol Hill, including policy advisor to the Senate Majority Leader, Bill Fritz, and chief of staff to Congressman Joe Pitts and Congressman Bill Baker. He's also been a senior advisor to Rick Santorum in 2012 and 2016 presidential campaigns. He's the author of the book, Dying to Live, Finding Joy in Giving Yourself to God, The Culture Upstream from Politics, and Making Goodness Fashionable. He is the president of Faith and Law, holds a master's in political theory, and has been married for 27 years and is the father of 3 redheads. Finally, my very good friend, Bishop Harry Jackson. Bishop Jackson is one of the chief conveners of the Reconciled Church, the Healing the Racial Divide movement, an effort to heal the racial division, first in the church and then in the country. He's the founder and chairman of the High Impact Coalition. HILC has become an agent for healing of our nation by educating and empowering churches and communities. He's a leading researcher on the Black church. His book, along with George Barna, High Impact African American Churches, was awarded an award in 2005 by the Christian Publishers Association Gold Medallion Award. He has been on national news more than all of us put together: O'Reilly Factor, Kelly File, NewsHour, CBS, NBC. You could go on and on, the Washington Post, a very long list, and a very sought-after commentator on issues relating to Black Americans and conservatives. He's also the senior pastor of the church, Hope Christian Church in the Washington, D.C. area with 2,000 attendees, and also serves as the presiding bishop of the International Communion of Evangelical Churches. I have a personal friendship with Bishop. I am in debt to him. We traveled to churches all over this state during the marriage amendment and continue to work together in many ways. So gentlemen, thank you all for being with us. Can you please welcome our panelists? So each of these gentlemen have 7 minutes to give a presentation, and I'll have 3 minutes to dialogue with them, and we'll start with Dr. Clayton Cloer.
Well, thank you for coming tonight. We really are honored to be a part of this time and for this church. Thank you for hosting this, and John for inviting us in your ministry in our state. But I have to tell you, I've come to the place where I dread the presidential election years. Now, before you rush to judgment, walk a mile in my shoe. I pastor a church in a community that elects the president of the United States every 4 years, because we live in Bubble Town. You know, we live where blue and red meet, and our church is that way. I pastor a church probably about 50% blue, 50% red, with about 30% of our members being African Americans and 7 different languages on every Sunday. And so it can make for a very turbulent time. Jonathan Haidt has really proven in a recent study that the strongest prejudice remaining in America is over political views, and it makes it very difficult for people with differing political views to coexist and to actually be in community together. And especially this year, I think we're living with the 2 most toxic and flawed personalities squaring off against one another. Ironically, they owe one another a great debt of gratitude because each one's campaign depends on the toxicity of the other one. It's so painful to the rest of us. And regardless of my dislike, the election year is here. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to speak publicly for the first time in my ministry about exactly who I'm going to vote for. And I'm doing that because I feel compelled. It's such a troublesome season. First, I'm a platform voter, while most people are personality voters. Haidt proved in his book, The Righteous Mind, that the majority of Americans vote for the person with whom they identify. Most voters connect with the candidate, then allow the candidate to educate them as to why to believe what the candidate believes. And typically, the best educator tends to win the presidency. I believe that every voter is motivated by their morality. However, their morality is informed and adopted because of the candidate with whom they identify. This year, neither candidate is easy to identify with. I do not, quite frankly, listen to the candidates first to get my information. I read the platform of the party that they represent to discover what agenda this candidate has and will be implementing. There is a sharp contrast in visions this year for our nation. The Democratic platform is pro-choice and for abortion, views homosexuality as an immutable quality like race, and will seek to establish law that persecutes, diminishes, and denigrates anyone who sees it otherwise as just simply deplorable. They'll seek to appoint judges who construct new law from the bench. The Republican platform's a little different. It's pro-life, it's against abortion, it'll implement an agenda that does not view homosexuality the same as a person's race and seek to establish laws that respect individuals and religious freedom of churches and schools to believe otherwise. They'll seek to appoint judges who interpret the laws that are already in existence. These have been platform mainstays for many years, and they're not going to change this year, and they haven't. But these platforms represent very different visions for our country. Second, I'll look at the character and competency of the candidates. Character counts and candidates count. Both candidates have very high negatives, as John's already referred to. One is known and one is largely unknown. I have little trust for either candidate. Hillary Clinton has already served in government and therefore has proven how she would perform with the trust of the people as an elected official. Third, I remember that we do not elect a king, but a presiding officer over one branch of the United States government. Change does not come by just one person or one election, even the presidency. Most people in our nation do not understand this. In fact, I believe that President Obama himself was surprised with all of his legal and governmental expertise and acumen, was surprised at how little change he by himself could exact. It takes a real movement of people. The power of the presidency is quite limited by the Constitution because we didn't want a monarchy in this country. Therefore, the party that they lead matters, and the agenda they seek to implement makes a difference long term. This is more than just a decision about one person. Your vote will be for an entire philosophy, a vision, an agenda for the nation. Because of these reasons, I will be voting for the Republican nominee. Now, this election presents to us a tough choice. But may I tell you that America is all about tough choices. We use a jury system. And therefore we put 12 Americans in a room to make a decision about guilt or innocence. That's tough choices. Many of the people in our country made a tough choice to immigrate to this nation. Many to enlist and go to war for us. And some to try out that what they perceived as a white institution or school or church. It's a nation full of tough choices. And so Jesus spoke more than words about the stewardship of this vote. And so some of my friends have said, I'm not going to vote. Others said, I can't vote for this man, I wouldn't. And others said they'll look for a third-party candidate. Maybe I'll speak to that in a little bit. But for me, these platform issues are very personal. In 1938, a 16-year-old girl left the mountains of North Carolina with a relative to travel to Jacksonville, Florida for a few days of vacation. Back then, it was a long trip. Had to change tires. You didn't just make it easy back in 1938. They spent a week down here, but when she returned a few months later, she was expecting a baby. Now, in 1938, in the mountains of North Carolina, that's not the best place to have a child out of wedlock. She gave birth to a baby girl, named the baby girl after the man who had gotten her pregnant. We don't know if it was rape or what. That little girl grew up, never knew who her father was. Her mother had a very difficult life. She never told that little girl she loved her and died at a pretty young age. But that little girl grew up. She came to know Jesus Christ. She married a Christian man. She had 2 kids. Her youngest is the one speaking to you tonight. I am so grateful to God that abortion was not an option for my grandmother. For had it been an option, I may have never existed. So this is personal to me. I've never voted for a candidate that celebrated abortion, nor will I start this election.
So, Dr. Cloer, I'm assuming you're going to vote for Donald Trump, given the
Correct.
position of your. And it seems like one of your argument is that you think the party platform, obviously that's clear that the Republican Party be more consistent with biblical values. How can we be assured, though, given Donald Trump's positions, which have been very vacillating over the years, that he would act in a manner consistent with the Republican platform? What assurances do we have of that?
Well, I wish I could tell you that we had a lot of assurances. What I can tell you is that the platform is about the most conservative we've had in decades, and that he has made one choice so far, and it was Mike Pence, who I believe, if you'll watch the debate tonight, hopefully it'll be about policies instead of personalities, but we'll actually see a very strong conservative. So I do think that voting another direction, at least for the Democrat nominee or Mrs. Clinton, there's no mystery about what she's going to do and what agenda she would forward. And but I do think that we already have a very strong congressional movement in this nation that will hold this president accountable. We just now overridden a bill a few weeks ago from the presidency. The presidency doesn't have full unbridled power. He is limited greatly. So I do trust that our team of people who have presented this platform is going to hold this man accountable.
So we talked earlier about this, and some of you in the audience may think this is a facetious question. It's not, because there's thousands of people watching. We don't know who they are and what their worldview is. But is Hillary Clinton an option for a Christian to vote for? And if not, why not, in your judgment?
Well, I mean, most certainly I could understand that she's an option. I don't think it's a good option. I don't think it's a wise option.
And why is it not an option for a Christian specifically?
Well, because the Scripture teaches the first horizontal commandment. If you take the 10 Commandments, the law, which is the way God chose to order his society and build civilization, the very first horizontal commandment was honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God has given you. That teaches us the first commandment with a promise. And the promise is longevity of your civilization. The promise is stability of your civilization. And so the family unit is the most important unit in your civilization. The family was the first institution created, and the nation that thrives is the nation that builds around strong, healthy families. The agenda of the Democrat Party is not about strong, healthy families. They've redefined marriage, for that matter, a person's identity and what gender is all about is under redefinition now. It's the pro-abortion movement. It's not for the health of families and children, and many of their policies evidence that. Whether it is an immigration policy that continues to have multiple communities that are communities that allow and permit great exploitation because they're not legally here. And so they exist right inside our borders. In my community, I deal with this every day, that there's such exploitation of children because their parents are not legal, and therefore they can't protect their children. They can't go to the police and the law, they're afraid. So we've produced that. Also, whether it's the family that comes to see me like Kim and Clark did a few months ago or years ago and said to me, it would be better if we divorce because we would get $700 more. He could move in with his parents, we could divorce, and then we would have more money at the end of the month. I'd be a single mom. Don't you think we should do that? And so these policies are detrimental to the family. So I would not vote for her because of the policies that she would implement.
Thank you. Bill Witcherman.
Thanks, John. Thank you for hosting this debate. Thank you to LifeBridge Church. This is an important and weighty issue. I also want to thank Dr. Cloer for your remarks, Bob Vander, Plaats, and Bishop Jackson. Evangelicals face a difficult choice this year, far more than any in my lifetime. The choice has divided us with many good people on both sides of this debate. Sadly, the division has also prompted the questioning of motives. This is unhelpful and it's unfair. We'll let God judge motives. Our job is hard enough, being e pluribus unum, out of many, one, and we don't need to begin by questioning one another's motives. Quick word about me. You'll have a hard time getting to my right. I'm a Republican because I'm a conservative, and a conservative because I'm a Christian. I believe that conservative policies best reflect a Christian worldview, but I refuse to divinize my own politics. Politically, I don't pretend to speak for God. Yet the driving motivation in my politics is the same as that for the rest of my life, to put the Lord first in my heart and my actions. There was only one of the 17 Republicans running for president whom I couldn't support. He won. I've heard my fellow believers give 4 reasons to vote for Trump. First, he's the lesser of 2 evils. Second, God uses bad people for good purposes. Third, he believes nothing, so with good people around him, Trump can be steered to do good things. And 4, Trump is a good man. The first argument, that Trump is the lesser of 2 evils, is the most compelling of the 3 arguments to me. I've used the same argument many times over the years, trying to convince my friends not to throw away their vote on a third-party candidate because the Republican wasn't sufficiently pure. I respect my friends who've concluded they must vote for Trump, however reluctantly. They believe the Supreme Court hangs in the balance and Trump is more likely to appoint conservative justices. I think they're right about that, too. I worked on judicial nominations for then Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist and also in the Bush White House, and I care deeply about the court. And yet I've concluded that this justification is insufficient for 2 reasons. The first, Trump may be a threat to our democratic republic. This is a serious charge. Unfortunately, Trump's own words have given me reason to be worried. I care about the Supreme Court because I care deeply about the government handed down to us by the founders. The founders knew how difficult it would be to sustain a democratic republic. Benjamin Franklin said to the wife of the mayor of Philadelphia when they emerged from the Constitutional Convention, "What kind of government have you given us, Mr. Franklin?" And he replied, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Just because we've been able to preserve this republic for 200 years, more than 200 years, doesn't mean that it goes on forever. I love the Constitution because it reflects the framers' fundamentally Judeo-Christian worldview that we're fallen beings and that God loves liberty, and he made us for liberty. But Trump has often demonstrated contempt for the rule of law. He sounded more like a strong man, impatient with constitutional constraints. He advocates death to the innocent family members of terrorists. He said, I quote, "You have to take out their families." He advocates torture, not as a means of extracting important intelligence, but as a means of retribution. He said he would do, quote, "a hell of a lot more than waterboarding." He said military leaders would obey his unlawful order because, quote, "I've never had any problem leading people. If I say do it, they're going to do it." He's repeatedly praised dictators like Vladimir Putin, lauding him as a strong leader. Garry Kasparov, who's a Russian opponent of Putin's, deplores Trump's praise of Putin, saying, "Putin is a strong leader in the same way that arsenic is a strong drink." Why in the world would Trump praise Putin again and again, unless it's because he actually admires him? Trump also said this, "When the students poured into Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government almost blew it. Then they were vicious, they were horrible, but they put it down with strength. That shows you the power of strength." He encourages violence against peaceful protesters. Among his many, many statements on this, "I'd like to punch him in the face. Try not to hurt him. If you do, I'll defend you in court. Don't worry about it. Knock the crap out of them." Trump admires strength, no matter what form it takes. This is inimical to the gospel, which exalts faithfulness, humility, and meekness, things that are themselves strong because they rely on God. And this leads to the second and most compelling reason why I believe the lesser of two evils argument doesn't stand. Trump corrupts us. Some people argue that the Never Trump crowd focuses on Trump's weaknesses and ignores Clinton's. Not so. We know who Clinton is, and we're not supporting her. But I have a higher standard for a Republican nominee. Trump corrupts what it means to be a Republican. If we support him, we become complicit in his reprobate behavior. Trump mocks disabled people. He brags about how many married women he slept with. He says prisoners of war, such as Senator John McCain, aren't heroes since they were captured. He accuses a native-born American judge of Mexican heritage of being unable to fairly rule in a case against him, what Speaker Ryan called a textbook case of racism. He insists the Muslim American father of a fallen soldier has no right to question him. He accuses President George W. Bush, my old boss, as the reason for the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He advocates a religious test as to who was allowed to enter the country, contrary to the very reason our country was founded. Charges the father of Senator Cruz as an accomplice in the murder and the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Many people won't vote for Clinton because they believe she's a liar. And they're voting for Donald Trump because they hope he's a liar. As an aside, I think it's worth noting that some evangelicals didn't vote for Romney because he wasn't conservative enough. Trump is way, way to Romney's left. He supports government-run health care. He says it repeatedly. He opposes entitlement reform, something which is killing our nation. He opposes free trade, and he has a long history of supporting liberal candidates and causes. When we line up behind this man, we undermine our credibility in the eyes of a watching world, and more than that, we do violence to our movement, saying the ends justifies the means. Another argument employed by evangelicals supporting Donald Trump is that God uses bad people for good purposes. Now, this is certainly true. But where in Scripture does it say that we should support the bad people? We're not called to do bad so that good will result. God's ways are beyond us, but our job is to support good candidates. I've heard some evangelical leaders say that we need a bad man to stand up to the bullying from the left. The implication is that a good man or woman who plays by the rules is not up to the task. It's like we're hiring a hitman to play dirty for the sake of good government. This has nothing to do with our faith. It reflects a lack of faith in the power of virtue to do what needs to be done. We don't do bad to do good. In fact, that's impossible if Scripture's to be believed. Ends and means both count in God's moral accounting. A third argument for Trump, and one I heard last week after a meeting that I had with Donald Trump along with a group of Christian leaders, is that Trump knows little and believes nothing. If we surround him with good people, he can be our puppet. Maybe so. It's patently true that his political views have shown themselves to be very flexible. He holds many different views, sometimes in the span of just a few days. And I know there are some very good people around him too. But this is a huge risk. He may not prove so pliable once given the most powerful job in the world. Plus, there are some decisions made only by the commander-in-chief. I know, I worked in the White House, especially in those moments of crisis. And I don't think he's trustworthy enough to make that right decision under pressure. The final argument in favor of Trump completely mystifies me. Namely, Trump is not bad. In fact, he's good, a truth teller, and humble. Another Reagan. Trump has implied that liberal judicial nominees should be assassinated. He suggested, without proof, that the election's rigged, setting up the possibility of serious civil strife if he loses the election. He never admits he's wrong, and he rarely asks God for forgiveness, since he believes he rarely sins to begin with. If Trump is a good man, I've got a totally different definition of good. So I will stand against Trump and Clinton. Instead, I'll vote for Evan McMullin. He's a conservative and a good man who will be on the ballot in about half the states. He can be a write-in candidate in almost every state. And then if no one wins 270 electoral votes, the House of Representatives will decide the outcome, as happened with Thomas Jefferson in 1801, and McMullin could be elected. Improbable? Yes. Impossible? No. Especially if enough evangelicals decide Trump doesn't deserve their vote. And it's an honorable path for those of us who want to be able to vote for an honorable conservative. I won't compromise core principle for the sake of party allegiance. If Trump becomes what it means to be a Republican, then I won't be a Republican. Hopefully, Trump's nomination will turn out to be a case of temporary insanity. But I will not allow Trump to be the face of the nation to the world, not with my vote. I will not allow vulgarity to stand in the place of virtue, not with my vote. I will not stand idly by while our national character is polluted, not with my vote. As Christians, we're called to do God's business in God's way. This means doing what we should and entrusting the results to Him.
Thank you, Bill. So, as you know, I was one of the few evangelical leaders for several months that said many of those observations and articles and spoke out. When in the primary, Trump was my 17th choice of 17 candidates. However, we're no longer in the primary, and there's some political realities we have to face. One of them is that Justice Scalia, bless his heart, is no longer with us, a brilliant scholar, and that appointment will be immediately replaced by the new President of the United States. Justice Ginsburg is 86 years old. She has pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, a heart stent, and is in very poor health. Probably very, very likely that those two justices will be replaced in the next administration, which will have policy implications for 25 to 30 years. All the things that we fight as social conservatives, abortion, the gay agenda, the erosion of religious liberty, secularism, these things are not being advanced by legislative bodies that have representative government. They're being advanced by the United States Supreme Court. Why do you not find that compelling, the 25 to 30 years of religious persecution that will only increase under a liberal court? Why is that not compelling to you?
And in fact, I've always found that compelling. I've walked precincts in the rain for candidates for whom I had very little regard and I really didn't like. But I did it because of the court. Donald Trump, because of all the reasons I just set out, especially with his challenging the rule of law, praising dictators, inciting violence, mocking people, the coarsening of the culture, it's a bridge too far. Culture's upstream from politics, and I care deeply about the court. But if this becomes what has been my party for 30 years, if this becomes the face of our party, I think that so corrupts us, and I can't go there. So it's tragic in my opinion, but the tragedy lay with the Republican Party nominating Donald Trump.
Thank you. I think the other political reality, that the second biggest thing that I see is that As you know, in 1992, Ross Perot ran for office. He had a personal vendetta against George Bush Sr., and it is because of Ross Perot most political observers believe that his third-party candidacy gave us Bill Clinton. We know that in 2000, when Al Gore ran, and President Bush, who now we know is president now, but as candidate Bush, we had the historic 2000 election vote. And Ralph Nader, many historic political observations believe that he was the reason why we don't have Al Gore. Because when you have a third-party candidate, you're actually helping to support or diminish one of the major parties. That's a political reality. And how are you looking at that? It doesn't seem like you're putting that in the calculation that by voting for Evan McMullin, we're actually helping Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, and it's back to the lesser of two evils argument, which I respect. I understand people who have come to that conclusion, however reluctantly. If I didn't think that he did so much violence to us, to our movement, to our witness in the world also. I mean, I now hear evangelicals who had been very harsh with the adulteries of Bill Clinton, making excuses for Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't just have locker room talk about all of his adulteries. He put it in a book. The book goes through many iterations of edits, and he was really proud of all the married women that he slept with over the years. He put it in a book. In terms of that, I mean, the way he talks, the things he says, it makes my blood boil to incite violence as he's done and to mock disabled people. Do you know anybody in your life, I'll just ask a question to stop, who mocks how other people look, who's above 8th grade? I thought about it. I don't have one person in my life that way.
One final question. It seems that people that are more focused on character and personalities would tend to not like Trump, but people that are more focused on public policy and the realities of public policy that will result from a Clinton presidency were more likely to support Donald Trump. Did I say that right? Yes, I did. Why don't you find that compelling? Why are you focusing on personality as opposed to policy, which is the bottom line of politics?
So I'm not actually, if it was just a personality issue, as I said, I've supported other candidates whom I really didn't like that well. I won't name names, but I knew them and I didn't like them. This is not about personality. This is about character. There's certain things, you know, life and marriage are hugely important to me, but so is nuclear war. We're putting a guy into office who has demonstrably awful character, and we're saying, you're the guy who makes this decision. So the stakes are way too high to have someone like him in office.
Thank you, Bill. Bob Vander.
Well, good evening. I'm really glad I get to go now.
Yeah.
And I want to thank Pastor Clayton and Brother Bill and Bishop Jackson, along with my peer, John Stenberger, for all participating in this, and of course for you taking the time, out of a Tuesday evening to come here to listen to this. And some of the words you just heard on this podium, it's probably the first time those words have ever been uttered on this podium, would be my guess. I want to speak real briefly. I'm going to change some of my remarks. I want to speak real briefly to a point that Bill brought up. Darla and I have been married for 33 years, and I have a deep commitment to that woman. And that is if she ever leaves me, I'm going with her, okay? Darla and I have 4 boys. She argues she has 5, we have 4, okay? Our 3rd son is significantly disabled, born with a very rare brain disorder called partial pachygyrial encephalate. Wasn't supposed to live for 2 days, then not 2 weeks, then not 2 years. And today, although he cannot walk, cannot talk, major seizure disorder, tracheotomy, full spinal fusion, he's just a tremendous blessing at age 23. And I got to tell you, it knocked me to the core when I saw a president or a candidate for president of the United States mock a person with disabilities. But I've got to tell you, as much as that hit me, and believe me, this is where the choices are hard, right? We're having a tough conversation tonight. Choices are hard. We're honest about this. As much as that hit me, the reality came when a peer of mine came to me and said, Bob, but remember, Hillary would have that child aborted. Choices are hard. Because of the geography that John talks about where I live in the state of Iowa, as soon as the presidential election is over with, when Mitt Romney lost in 2012, the very next day I got calls by people who want to be president of the United States. Some of them even started cultivating that ground earlier because they thought Mitt Romney would lose. One of those people was Donald Trump. I consider Donald Trump a friend of mine, and most days he may consider me a friend to him. Now, there's days I'm sure he doesn't think I am. It was on my stage when I invited him to a leadership summit where he made the comment that he has never asked God for forgiveness. It was on my stage where he said he likes veterans who weren't captured. And when Frank Luntz was doing the interviewing of the candidates that day on the stage that I presented in front of 3,000 Iowans who were going to end up caucusing, I thought, this campaign is over. We just witnessed the Howard Dean moment. There's no way this guy goes on. But I fully believe we underestimated the pent-up emotion that exists in this country with Washington, D.C., and that it's broke, it does not represent us, and I don't even care if it's wrong. I'm willing to blow it up to get it right. I think that's what happened here. For many of the reasons that Bill iterated and that John so articulately stated in many of his articles about Trump, I did not endorse Mr. Trump. I endorsed Ted Cruz. I went all in for Ted Cruz. I thought we could have a principled conservative running against Hillary Clinton. Now, whether you like Ted Cruz or not, I was Mike Huckabee's state chair in 2008 when he ran for president. I endorsed Rick Santorum. Bobby Jindal was a friend. Rick Perry was a friend. The list goes on. I had a lot of friends in this race. And I thought a lot of them would do an excellent job. As a matter of fact, when I get a chance to go to churches now and speak, many times I get asked, this is the choice we've got? These are our choices? And when I remind the church, the body of Christ, all the time, this presents a huge opportunity for the church. A huge opportunity for the church to be light into a world that is seeking and that is searching. And I believe the church needs to be the church. I think for too long we have put our hope into political candidates and in political parties. It reminds me when Jesus was at the height of his ministry and Peter and the disciples were walking along with Jesus. Jesus was predicting how he'd be captured, how he'd be persecuted, how he'd be tortured, how he'd be beaten, and how he'd be put to death. And Peter took him aside and said, whoa, that is not going to happen. We've got a good thing going on here. You see the crowds? You're doing these drive-by miracles. This is awesome. Just keep it up. We're going to overtake Rome. It says Peter rebuked Jesus. And Jesus looked at Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan." Why? Because Peter's focus was on the temporary. Peter's focus was on the things of this world. And Jesus says, my mission is much bigger than this. My mission is much bigger than this. And for we as the body of Christ, I believe we need to take that with us. Regardless of who we elect, our mission is much bigger. We should not be disqualified. We should not be compromised for the ultimate of prizes. We have a culture that is sprinting away from the heart of God. In Hebrews, it talks about drifting away from the heart of God. I believe today we are sprinting away from the heart of God. And unless we as a culture turn our hearts back to God, his principles, his precepts, and full pursuit of his righteousness, it does not matter who we elect. America does not have a hope that it once had unless we completely turn back to him. 2016, I believe, is big, but it's like putting a finger in the dike. The church needs to think bigger. We need to be the Nathan to the David, the prophet to the king. There needs to be a restored relationship here. Because the power, as Clayton talked about, and the power, as Bill talked about, is not in the President of the United States. It is not in the Supreme Court of the United States. It is in we the people. The founders gave us the right of being the king. And the people need to get it right. The people need to get it right. We need to be a prophetic voice to the culture. You take the church's voice out from a culture, which we have done, And you'll get to a point where you don't even know what restroom you should use anymore. Think about that.
Yeah.
We need to restore the prophetic voice to the culture. We need to be after God's standards, not a party, not a candidate. We need a revival in this country like none other. When Ronald Reagan announced he was running for president in 1980, matter of fact, it was 1979, he said, I believe this country hungers and thirsts for a spiritual revival. And I believe that more than ever today, that this country hungers and thirsts for the church to be the church and for a spiritual revival to sweep this land. That's what I believe we should put our hope into. I have not endorsed and I will not endorse in this race. I will vote. But here'd be my counsel to you. I would not make a theological argument for however you vote. I don't think a theological argument can be made. If you want to make a practical argument about appointing Supreme Court justices, I get that. You want to make a practical argument about who you're going to surround yourself with because it's a team of people, I get that. If you want to make a practical argument about repealing the Johnson Amendment, holding firm to religious liberty, I get that. But I would not compromise the gospel by making a theological argument. Now I'm going to end with this. This is what I said to Mr. Trump when I was in his office after Ted Cruz suspended his campaign. It was mid-June. I said, Mr. Trump, I'm going to be a friend to you. I'm going to be a real friend. I'm not going to be a lapdog and tell you that everything you do is great. When you do wrong, I'm going to tell you you do wrong. And when you do right, I'm going to cheer you on for doing right. That's what friends should do. And that's what the church should do this election. We should not go blindly in just support of a candidate. We should let them know when they do wrong and when they do right.
Thank you, Bob. So you have some millennials in your household, some young men that you've raised, and I know that millennials...
Darla has raised.
Okay, thank you. That's appropriate. I think it seems to me that a lot of young people are more likely to not vote for Trump, people that are older, perhaps in the same age range or something, perhaps they've been around. Is it just the frontal lobe development? What is it? Why are older people more likely to vote for Trump? You missed an opportunity on the frontal lobe development. That was a joke.
I missed it too. John, let me go back to a thing that I was a teacher. I was an educator.
So let me be very specific with you.
Okay.
Do we do harm? I think that one of the arguments made by Eric Erickson and others is that we do harm to the gospel when we support Donald Trump. You indicate that you're not going to endorse him, but you are going to vote for him. Is that really a difference with a distinction? And do we do disservice to the gospel by supporting someone like this?
Well, I think it's a big distinction between endorsing someone and ending up voting for someone.
Okay.
And there's a huge distinction. You talk about the young people, and believe me, when I'm around young people, I'm around them a lot. They're the ones who are holding me to task, holding me to account. Because you can fool a fool and you can con a con, but you cannot kid a kid. Kids are looking for authenticity. And they're saying, Dad, you said marriage is important to you. This is not being championed in this campaign. You're saying the sanctity of human life is important to you. But it's reported that Planned Parenthood does good things. You're saying these things. I mean, so I think that's why I'm saying about if you get there in support, if you get there in voting for whoever you vote, don't compromise the light. The light needs to shine bright. And that means where you say, you know what? He's flawed, she's flawed, whatever it is, and then let them know when they do wrong, and then let them know how you arrived at this decision yet. Just don't go blindly and being a lapdog and saying, I'm all in, I'm all in, I'm all in. This is a tough election.
Great.
And we need to address it that way.
Panelists, I need to draw your attention to the time clock, if you could please respect that. And also, if you're listening by Facebook Live or through the live stream at My Faith Votes, please submit a question online. We would like to take some questions from Twitter or Facebook. Just hashtag pray, think, vote. Hashtag pray, think, vote. And we'll take a couple of questions in the audience as well. Bishop Harry Jackson.
Thanks, John, and greetings, everyone. Clayton, Bill, Bob, and John, have done a great job, don't you think, thus far? They really have. After hearing all of them, I feel like I am, who is the cartoon character? That's all, folks. What could we say to beat that? Well, I want to go to kind of a practical stand, and I think we should be light, show the way, use our influence. We need to be the ultimate constituency, the way I see, meaning we're hiring somebody to do a job. The choices may not be the ones we would have chosen, but perhaps God is trying to help us evaluate our own hearts. For me, I'm concerned that I don't want a socialistic nanny state that is trying to act like it's God. And I think we're at a crossroads of whether we're going to follow Judeo-Christian principles or not, even if the candidates themselves aren't the epitome of great examples. So I could talk about character, I could talk about David's sin, the Apostle Paul, I could go down a lot of lists. I can talk about the past versus the current versus the future. I won't do any of that. I want to tell you that in the 1950s, my dad was here in the state of Florida, in Tallahassee, and he was threatened at gunpoint by a state trooper who basically said the N-word and pointed a gun at his head, then discharged it right over his head and said, "Next time in, I'm going to shoot you." And it was all over voter registration. I'm here to tell you that not voting is not an option, and we need to vote. People lost their lives for this privilege. Does that make any sense? So I'm adamant about it, so I want to weigh in. Now, also, another thing that informs where I am, and I'm going to tick off 7 reasons why I am going to boldly vote for Donald Trump. And I'm going to talk about this very practically. But I pastored a church in upstate New York. It was a multiracial church, 90% white. I've been involved in a battle for racial reconciliation for a number of years. And I'm tired of people trying to fix the race problem through what I call the politics of grievance. And what I'm going to get if I get Hillary in there is a politics of grievance. I feel your pain. We're going to do better than the other guys do. I understand you're me. It's like we're in this adulterous relationship with the Democratic Party. They show up on the Sunday before the Tuesday. They promise us all kind of things. Ultimately, like adultery, they're coming. They want what they want, when they want, how they want it. Then later on, I don't get no flowers. I don't get no dinner. No romance is involved. It's ugly, all right? So here are my 7 issues. Number 1, religious freedom and liberty. Repealing the impact of the Johnson Amendment is critical for the church to just function and be a voice in the culture. Trump says he'll do it. I believe it. Number 2, Supreme Court justices. We have got some issues, and it won't be solved by just thinking positive thoughts or even powerful prayer without action. We must take some steps of action. Support of Israel. Oh my goodness. This could be an existential threat at this moment for the very life of this nation. Who in the world wrote the Iran deal? I mean, we know who wrote it. That's a rhetorical question. But I think you understand that something is rotten in Denmark, and we got to just bust this system down. Now, as far as African Americans are concerned, the educational reform is not going to happen under Hillary. We need choice in schools. We need charter schools. We need other kinds of options. If we don't deal with the educational gap, we will continue to deal with the overcriminalization of the Black community and Hispanic communities. Does that make sense? Business empowerment. Under President Barack Obama, God bless him, 1.8% of small business loans went to African Americans when they represent 12 or 13% of the population. Under Bush, 8.2% approximately So it's much better, 4 times better or more than it has been under Barack Obama. But we need more investment, more jobs. Many people derive a sense of dignity and a sense of calling from what they do for a living. We need jobs in the hood. 6, we need to deal with nonviolent offenders. Need to come back home. We need an opportunity for them to recapture their lives. And I believe that Mr. Trump is very much aware. Dr. Carson has been coaching him along these lines, and I believe they'll work on nonviolent offenders getting a second chance. Think about it this way. If you do cocaine in the suburbs, you get one set of sentences. If you do crack in the hood, they'll throw you in jail and throw away the key. Something is out of whack with this system, and it's got to be addressed. And once again, Hillary's talking about all kind of sensitivity and talking to the police. She has a part of the problem. She's not going to fix it. 7th and finally, family tax incentives. We need incentives to impact our families and to give the incentive on a positive side for people to stay together, for them to build strong families, blacks, Hispanics, other minorities, and even whites at the lower end, if you want to call it that, bottom rung of this class structure. So I think it's fairly clear and it's really simple. And I am not voting for Hillary Clinton. I want you to understand that. Not going to do it. And I can't throw away my vote. So, Mr. Trump, you've got my vote. I'm not endorsing your character, but I believe you're going to take the right kind of action.
Thank you, Bishop Jackson. So this is interesting. You're rooting your argument primarily in the interest of the Black American community.
Yes.
And dealing with some of the policy issues and perhaps even racial reconciliation at some point. I know he made the observation today, I saw on CNN, that it seems like every month there's a race riot now. I didn't vote for Barack Obama, but at least I thought, here's a man with an intact family, and we can put this ugly sin behind us. It's worse than it's ever been now, than ever. And I wish, this is off topic, but I wish Barack Obama would have pulled every black rapper in entertainment in the White House and said, gentlemen, it's a new day. Pull up your pants, stop using the N-word, treat women with respect, and get with the program. He's done nothing of that, and that's been very disappointing. Back on topic.
Yeah.
Given Trump's at least perceived divisive nature, why do you think that he could be a force for bringing the Black American community together and creating peace amongst the races again?
Well, I think his divisive nature, you're dealing with a guy who came to the forefront because he had a shock jock tendencies. I'm not sure he even knew in the beginning the exact policies he was going to totally advocate. Also, I believe he approached some of these issues like a general manager at a New York construction site. He's solving problems. So this game, politics, is too fast and furious for you to make too many mistakes. I think he's made some hoof and mouth kind of mistakes in terms of how he's talked. I think that that's largely where a lot of this, the assessment of his character is coming from. And I'm not the man's friend, but I've sat in the room with him, talked to him. Like Ben Carson, I believe that there's a thoughtful individual in there. And I think that he can be reasoned with. And I think that if given the incentive with a constituency that says, we're going to be your conscience, we're going to hold you accountable, that he will respond to what we demand.
So America's heard a lot about the Johnson Amendment in the 50s. Then Senator Johnson amended Section 501c3 of the United States Code to prohibit all nonprofits, including churches, from engaging in direct electioneering activities. Before that time, from the Puritans to the front, they had election sermons where they literally called out the bad candidates and the good candidates. Trump says he's going to overturn the Johnson Amendment and allow churches to speak freely, including endorse and be engaged directly in political activity. How important is that if he does do that and we remove the Johnson Amendment and allow churches to engage?
Again, I'm going to answer. I feel like the black church during the civil rights movement never would have been able to turn America around if it hadn't organized in church buildings, organized in the church community, and having some arbitrary law put on us to prevent us from doing that. I think it was originally aimed to shut down the black church and shut down the moral conscience that the church is supposed to be. It's anti-Christian, it's anti our prophetic role in the culture, and I think this is one of those high issues. If we get weaker, and to your point, we can become less prophetic in the culture, then we can kiss the culture goodbye.
Jeb Bush has recently said publicly that he can neither vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton as a matter of conscience. We're hearing a lot of people talk about conscience, this sense of right or wrong inside of us. What do you say to the person that says, I just can't in good conscience vote for either one of these people?
Well,
how do you process that?
I want to be real blunt. You need to build a bridge and get over it. This is not about you. This is about people like my father who were threatened at gunpoint. This is about people who got lynched and tortured. This is about injustice that won't be dealt with if you get an old crony system further empowered in the land. This is about right and wrong, taking action right now. This is like you're in a street fight and you got to decide whether you're man enough to step up and do what's necessary, or you're going to say, oh, this offends me. Build a bridge and get over it. I'm sorry, forgive me.
It's all right, brother. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do a little extemporaneous on you, gentlemen. This is not planned, but we're going to do a little dialogue. But in a couple moments, I'm going to allow each one of you to ask a 30-second question to some other panelist, and then that panelist has 60 seconds to answer the question. Okay? This is a surprise, but I'm hoping you can flow with it. So, Bill, well, let me ask this to Bob. How significant is it that Trump seems to be surrounding himself remarkably with really solid Christian people? First of all, his VP choice, his campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, who are friends with all of us here on the panel, very solid lady. I mean, Mike Huckabee is saying he's talking to him. When I met with Ben Carson, he said he's on the phone with him every other day, practically chit-chatting back and forth, asking for counsel. I mean, does this give you some assurance that actually, because he's a decentralized decision-making, that he could actually, say, handle it to some really good people, and we could have some really good results?
It's one of the biggest assurances of his candidacy. Anybody who's been in leadership knows you're only as good as the people you put around yourself. I guarantee you Hillary Clinton's going to put around herself people like George Soros and like Tim Gill and people that are just completely away from our worldview. Donald Trump, with his first pick being the vice president pick, and Mike Pence, it gave us an indicator. Who's he going to put around himself? Kellyanne Conway, his campaign manager, David Bozzi, the deputy campaign manager, Pam Pryor, the National Faith Outreach Director. Those are all good people. Then you throw in guys like Dr. Ben Carson, Mike Huckabee, and several of the other candidates. You're only as good as those people that are around you. And I guarantee you, even for Donald Trump, when he steps into that role, if he gets to step into that role, he's going to find out that this job is beyond him. He's going to have to rely on some very good people. And I really believe, and although I don't agree with everything about Trump Enterprises either, I don't believe you can lead Trump Enterprises and not rely on good people. So I've got to believe there's something in there about I need to rely on good people.
Bill, my problem with Mitt Romney was not that he was a Mormon. He wasn't Mormon enough. I mean, if he was actually a faithful Mormon and he was consistent on life, consistent on the marriage issue, he was vacillating all as governor of Massachusetts. Does Evan McMullen's association with the LDS Church, does that give you any pause, or were you a Mitt Romney supporter, and do you support both of them equally that way?
So just on the Mitt Romney part, I mean, the interesting thing to me is it seems like during that election, we Talmudically divined what he said several years ago about one particular, he shaded this. Trump does it He flip-flops every day. He's so, I mean, if the Republican Party, usually the thing that unites all Republicans is fiscal responsibility, right? Mm-hmm. Some of us are socially conservative, some of us are national security conservative, but we're all fiscally, that's what unites us. Here's a guy who says that there should be no reform to entitlements. The biggest part of the budget, the only thing that you can actually do to balance your budget is get a hold of entitlements, and he says, we're not going there. In fact, we're expanding them. So on that, like, it's not even close. So on the question of the faith, Trump, first of all, I mean, I'm not going to judge the man's faith, but I think that forgiveness is pretty key to understanding of the gospel. So,
sure.
And I also think that
I'm asking if Evan McMullen's
I know,
LDS
but
faith
and I'm
gives
answering
you
your question
pause.
essentially this way: virtue and character is how I vote. I'm not looking for a pastor in chief, but I do care about virtue and character. And I think there's a world of difference between Evan McMullen, and, for that matter, Mitt Romney and Donald Trump.
So you may not have enough information to answer this question, but what about Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate? Is he an acceptable option for Christians, and if not, why not?
I'm not willing to say who's acceptable not for Christians. I don't want to divinize my politics that way. He's not an acceptable candidate for me for multiple reasons.
And what would those reasons be?
I'm a social conservative. He's not. I'm a national security conservative. He's not.
Right. Dr. Cloer, one of the things when we were fighting the marriage amendment battle here in Florida in 2008, we talked about all the bad things that were going to happen if gay marriage was legalized, if natural marriage was kind of redefined. And now we're seeing not just the slippery slope, we're seeing a free fall. I mean, there's no slope anymore. It's just anything's possible. And one of the arguments we've made is that when you institute same-sex marriage, it's the end of gender in society. And we're seeing that now. I know in Iowa, they recently said that churches, as long as you open your doors to the public, you're a public accommodation, and you have to conform with non-discrimination laws regarding bathrooms and the use of transgenders in bathrooms. And I made this argument a couple of months ago to pastors all over the state, saying this is going to happen years from now, maybe, and here we see it right now. One of the things I'm concerned about is the encroachment upon the gospel. Two of the most important things we can say as Christians is that Jesus is the only way to God, and that marriage is the union of one man and one woman. Yet these are the two most hated and despised statements in our society. And the institutional hostility towards specifically Christianity is closing in rapidly. Are you concerned about that in this election, and how do you process that in terms of your choice?
Well, I don't like using fear as a motivation. Typically, fear is a poor motivation. Our Lord is not the author of that. However, the boy who cried wolf and the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Well, the sky is falling. We are redefining the essence of our republic when it comes to the First Amendment. And that is not hyperbole. In 2008, when we traveled the state, I tried to tell folks that in California, from May until that election time, you remember May, the Supreme Court in California redefined marriage, and in an election, Prop 8 was adopted. During that period of time, they started redefining gender in every law in the state of California, and they could not determine how many genders now are going to be in the books, whether it was 5, 7, all the way up to 17. And people would look at me like I was crazy, like I was using hyperbole or overstating or trying to use fear or somehow, this guy's not even talking about what's possible in America. It is the reality. This administration, this election will determine over the next 8 years how religious freedom is defined in this country, and that is not an overstatement. And therefore, a Christian nurse will be forced to perform abortions or not have her job. A 4 and 5-year-old in public school will have to be educated on gender choice, because gender is a choice now. It's not an immutable quality. It's not something given to you at birth. It is a stewardship issue for children. And parents, listen to this, and parents who dissuade their little children from choosing the gender that they may want to choose because of their religious convictions will be deemed as bigoted and narrow-minded. And then there will be a conflict between the state and the family. And the state is going to provide freedom for that child to be able to choose the gender as a 3rd grader or a 2nd grader. This is coming like a freight train. And so this election is going to make a decision about how we frame religious freedom in this country. Too much is at stake. That's why I've been so provoked to speak out about this. The culture has now framed the debate as personality.
Let me be specific. If Hillary Clinton is elected or not, do you think that the slide towards secularism and the hostility toward Christianity will be inevitable anyway? Or do you think that that will really make a difference in terms of the presidency?
No, I think it will make a dramatic difference. I think she's going to appoint judges that continue to leverage this agenda, and laws continue to be passed. But if we elect a Republican, namely Donald Trump, and then we're able to appoint judges who will continue to interpret the Constitution instead of redefine it, then this would be good for our children. There's a lot at stake. If I could say one more thing, John, because the way you frame the discussion is the end that you will end up. So however you frame it, if you frame it from a personality perspective, you're going to get lost in the personalities. Remember I told you Jonathan Haidt has already published the massive survey, and Jonathan Haidt's no right-winger. He's a sociologist far to the left. But people don't know what to believe. My brother said that culture is upstream from politics. I disagree. In Massachusetts, when the DOMA law was overturned, only about 40% of people of Massachusetts believed that marriage should be anything other between a man and a woman. In the course of 18 months, that shifted to 60% believed it could be something other than a man and a woman, because the people don't know what to believe anymore, and the church is no longer framing the discussion around policies. We're framing it around personalities, and every 2 years personalities change, and so we're getting nowhere. We're not teaching anybody the virtue and truth of the Word of God, which should be our guide. And the way you frame the debate is going to determine where you go. We don't elect a king. We elect a presiding officer over a big group of people.
Thank you, Dr. Cloer. So we're going to take some questions now from the audience. If you would like to ask a question, if you would please raise your hand. Yes, sir, right here. If you would please state your name, where you're from, and then your question, please.
Thanks. Mark Holacek here from Windermere and from this church. Thank you all for being here. Question related to the vice president position. Of course, the debate is later tonight, and in particular, Mike Pence. A number of you have spoken about how he's a credible indication of the kind of people Donald Trump is putting around him. And we know Trump, I think, is 70, Clinton is 68, and who knows what kind of health she has. It's probably more important than ever this time, and often vice presidents run for president or actually become president. What could you say to us of your knowledge of Mike Pence and why you feel he is that strong person that we could take great comfort and confidence in as conservative Christians? And what ought we be looking for in tonight's debate on that subject?
Thank you for the question. I'll go first here. You know, Governor Pence is one of us. There's some politicians that come to us, and there's other politicians that come from us. And Governor Pence, I believe, comes from us. Matter of fact, our peer in Indiana, John Stemberger's peer, and my peer in Indiana is Kurt Smith. Mike Pence used to sit on the board of the Indiana Family Policy Council. He surrounded himself with people like John Stemberger and Bob Vander in his cabinet when he was governor of Indiana. Without question, Governor Pence had one major flaw, and we got to see it spotlighted. That was the RFRA battle, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act battle. But I'm willing to give him a mulligan, so to speak. I mean, not everybody's perfect on everything, but I know he's got the right core. He says he's a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. And I think what you'll see in tonight's debate is he's very well qualified.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am, right here, down in the front.
Hi, my name is Dolores Barton. As stated earlier, it is obvious that we are in a battle for our faith, our values, and our beliefs. And as parents, what can we do to equip and get our children ready, because our children are still inside the public school system that is undermining what we believe. So what can we do to empower them so that they can continue in the faith?
Goodness, that's a whole nother panel of discussion. Great question, but Pastor, let me let you take a swipe at that, and then we'll move on quickly.
The best thing you can do is get them involved in doing some ministry. My son worked with our Kirkman Community Church, which is on Kirkman Road. It's in a little bit of a distressed community for his last 2 years in high school before he went to college. Incredibly impactful. Turn these policy issues into people and stories. Let them see it for themselves. Take them there. And then it will frame so much of what they do. Don't just let it be in your church. You need that. You don't just let it be in your home. You need that. But then take them out to where the people are and let them feel it, smell it, touch it, taste it, see it. And it will make a huge impact in their life.
Very good. Other questions about the election specifically? Yes, sir, in the back with the beard.
Really quick, we have a question from Facebook Live. Danny wants to know, as Christians, should we be theologically talking about voting for the lesser of two evils?
So let me just respond to that, and I'll let somebody else want to respond. I think that every choice, we live in a fallen world, it's an imperfect world. As Francis Schaeffer would say, things are not as they ought to be. Every choice we make is shot through with sin. At my best, when I look great up here, I have motives that are not pure. So I think that, the question really is, where is the disqualification issue? I'm not sure what Bill would respond to this, but at a certain point, can character and can sinfulness disqualify us? And I don't know the answer to that. I think that if you focus on character, it seems like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are it's kind of a tie. I mean, they have both depravity in different ways, right? But in terms of policy, I think that there's a very clear difference between policy. So I think that every choice we make has sin tainted in it. Janet Parshall, when she did the NRB debate, did a long history of presidential candidates who were flawed with all kinds of sinful affairs, stuff we don't even know about that are kind of little pinpoints in history that we didn't have social media back then. And she brought all of them up, and it was fascinating. It doesn't justify anything currently, but it put things in context.
Hello. Hi. My name is Rafael Neves. I live here in Windermere, Florida. And I'd like to maybe present a different perspective about the federal government. How about a libertarian candidate? Wouldn't he be, on the long term, be better for the country? For example, in the question of abortion, Gary Johnson is not pro-abortion. He isn't just in favor of leaving the issue up to the states to decide on that. So wouldn't a libertarian candidate be more beneficial to religious liberty and other issues on the long term?
Go ahead.
Well, there are three ways. I think there are three ways to vote for Hillary Clinton. I think there's the preferred way. Paige Patterson said this a few days ago. There's the preferred way as far as she's concerned, vote for her. But then there is the not to vote or to vote for a third-party candidate. And I think it's a bad decision to vote for a third-party candidate. You say, well, I'm principled, and this, I had 16 others that I would have supported, but not this one. I didn't get the one that I wanted. And I really thought about that because I struggled with it at first. And the Lord just brought to mind Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb, they lost the primary. And, they cleaned up, they worked it. They didn't leave. They stayed. And Samuel tried to dissuade the people vehemently. God does not want this. God does not want you to have this king. And the people said, we want a king. And then God said to Samuel, go and anoint him with oil and establish him. So I think that the reality of our system is that you have the stewardship of a vote. And I am afraid that many of our people are taking that solemn stewardship and they're going to bury it in the sand and say that I can't handle the struggle of expressing that and risking it. And so I'm going to vote for someone who is not going to have a possibility of winning. And that's not a good choice, in my opinion and my conviction.
Quickly, Bob.
I want to address the other part of your question, and that's the states' rights issue. States' rights is a conservative thing to believe in. We agree with states' rights, that states are where the laboratory is. However, states' rights is also a way to deflect hard issues. A thing like abortion, that is a moral issue. And that's wrong in every state, not in some. It'd be like us saying, no, we can have slavery in Iowa, but you can't have it in Missouri. There are issues that are right and wrong. And that's why the church needs to be the prophetic voice into a culture. It's not a states' rights issue. It's a God standard issue.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, so we're going to have rapid fire. I'm going to shorten the time. I'm going to do 30-second question, 30-second answer in the interest of time. Bishop, we're going to start with you. 30-second question, and please don't all gang up on Bill, but if you have to, you have to. But 30-second question, 30-second answers, very quickly, if we could.
Pastor Clayton.
Yes, sir.
I want to ask you, how do you make this about policy instead of personality? It seems like there's a bleed through, and all of us are addressing something to do with personality along with policies.
Well, I think you have to frame the discussion for your congregation and realize as for your own circle of friends. Haidt says that people make their voting decision based on their relationships with their circles of friends, and the people that they identify with, they let educate them, and that's the way they do with candidates, and that's the way they do with their friends. And so you have a prophetic and profound voice, but you need to understand the Word of God so you can frame in your mind what policies would be the best for our country. These personalities are going to come and go. I've pastored here for 13 years in this community, and how many elections have we had? There are going to be different personalities. Make sure you know the policies and the root of those policies out of the Word of God. Then teach that to your friends and your people, and from that, look at the candidates through the policy.
Bob.
Bishop Jackson, regardless of who's elected, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, the next president, what is the number one thing that they can do to bring healing to this ever-present racial divide that we have in this country right now?
Well, I think it's going to be education, only because there seem to be two Black Americas. There is a disadvantaged Black America struggling with class, generational poverty, and then there's already a group that's upwardly mobile. And again, the stats on who winds up in prison, you got functionally illiterate people who can't rise above certain economic boundaries and barriers. It's educational. And I think it's going to have to be attacked as one of the longer term issues, that somehow equity in the educational system has got to be finally addressed and made more even.
Bill.
I'll ask Pastor Cloer, Dr. Cloer, does it concern you that if Trump wins the presidency, which he could, that Trumpism will become Republicanism? Conservatism will be dead because he will be defining what it means to be a Republican in all the ways that I mentioned already about no more entitlement reforms and also bringing reality TV to the mainstream.
No. Now, the reason I believe that Donald Trump won the primaries is because he actually stole the moral authority. Because charm is deceitful, and people are sick and tired of political speak. And while the candidates I supported personally, they spoke politics. Donald Trump didn't. It became actually authentic, though it was scary. But he stole the moral authority, and that's why he won against many great guys. I am not afraid of that, and the reason why is because the Republican Party and many conservatives are already voicing their checks and balances to this man, and we're quickly going to restrain him. And so, no, I really am not frightened that he's going to be a new Reagan and be able to totally rebuild the party. That's not going to happen.
2-minute closing statements, starting with Bishop Jackson, ending with Dr. Cloer.
Okay. I think the real issue for me is I think about healing the racial divide. We have a explosive situation that's going to happen if we don't take immediate, intermediate, and long-term action. I think we're going to have to deal with the moral issues of the day, which Bernie Sanders was talking about class. He was talking about criminal justice. And his answers, I thought, were all muddied, and they came from more of a big government socialistic point of view. But he really is dealing with moral issues. I think Trump is really talking about change. And so my issue then is, how can we give a positive way for us to break the class delineations in our culture? I happen to think free enterprise, helping people find jobs in urban areas, find a sense of purpose for their lives, is a great way to deal with that. Generational poverty has got to be dealt with as well. People who feel hopeless will do desperate things. And so there needs to be a sense of hope, but that hope can't come on the basis of a government check. That, hey, we're just going to give you more this and that and the other, and somehow you're supposed to pull yourself out of this problem that you're dealing with. And then I think the race problem in America specifically, I think there's real racial hurt that can only be dealt with by the church. Jesus said, in the last days, nation or ethnic group will rise up against the nation. It's kind of inbred in the human condition. Only the church has the grace or the capacity to lead the way.
Thank you.
Amen.
Bob?
Did you say Bob, John?
Yes.
Okay. For part of my closing statement, I want to answer one of the questions that was asked, and that's about sending our children to the public school system. I was raised in the private school. I'm a Dutch kid whose parents just didn't threaten to send me to a reform school. They did send me to a reform school. And I went and I taught, and I was a high school principal in a public school system. And I hope Mr. Trump is listening, and those who want to be educational leaders. Our schools were not designed to raise our children. Our schools are there for teaching and for learning. Raising and nurturing children, according to Deuteronomy 6, is to the parents and it is to the church. It is not to the government school system. And so we must cease and desist that immediately. And if they're so intent on raising our children, then we as parents need to choose other options for our children, which is homeschool, private school, other schools, but know what you're getting into as parents. That's for the youth. To the body of Christ, whether you are hashtag never Trump or hashtag all in for Trump or somewhere reluctantly in between, do not let our light be compromised. Do not let our light be disqualified. Let's be united, not around a party, not around a candidate, but around in the persons whose name we bear, Jesus Christ.
Bill.
So in the lesser of two evils argument, everyone here, I bet, has, and everybody watching has a point at which they would say the lesser of two evils argument doesn't carry the day. Let's say there's two dictators. One murdered 40 million, the other 38 million. You vote for the one who murdered 38 million? Under the lesser of two evil arguments, it's clear. I bet you would also say, oh, I can't do that. Now, I'm not arguing that that's what we have here. The only question is, at what point is your threshold hit? When can you say, I cannot vote for either of these candidates and I need to vote, in my case, for a third party? For me, it's not a close call. I have so many singular straws that broke the camel's back with Donald Trump. Torture as a means of retribution. No, no, no. Punishing the innocent. Never. Making military leaders obey unlawful orders. Never. This is what it means to have lex rex, the law is the king. And he would put himself in the position of king and lauds dictators. Donald Trump lies a lot, and ironically is more of a politician than almost any of I've ever seen. I've never seen anyone brazenly lie as often as he does and completely deny what he said yesterday, even when shown the tape, as he does. It's absolutely remarkable. But there are times when he is to be believed. I don't think there's a big constituency in this country for dictatorship. How can you explain his repeated lauding of these strong men, like the quotes that I already gave you, Tiananmen Square? How do you explain a thing like that? Except that maybe he does believe this. I do fear that Trumpism will become republicanism. Fiscal responsibility will be dead. The president has to sign entitlement reforms. He won't sign them. He'll expand government. To me, fiscal responsibility is a moral issue. In sum, I got into this business because I care deeply about justice. I'm not a party guy first. I care about ideas. I care about policies, and I care about virtue and character. And Donald Trump fails on all my tests.
Dr. Cloer.
Well
said.
Clark and Kelly move into Pine Hills. They have 2 kids. They lose their job. And they come to see their pastor. And they say, you know, if we get a divorce, we'll get $700 more from the government. She can move in a property that's single parent housing. I can live with a buddy and continue to try to find a job. There's an immigrant family who's not registered, and their daughter's being exploited and the wife's being exploited. The husband can't do anything about it. He sure can't tell the police. He just comes to his pastor and weeps and says, what do I do? And then there's a 7-year-old at school who hears from his teacher about how he needs to make a gender choice, whether or not he's going to be a boy or a girl. And he comes home so confused, so troubled. And at the church, we're really struggling because now we've lost our moral standing in the society. We're known as kind of bigots and hate mongers. This will be my world in 2 years. In our community, if we elect Hillary Clinton. And that troubles me deeply. And it's going to be very real to all of us. I pray that God will have mercy upon us, that He'll guide us, and we'll seek His will. And I pray that the Lord will turn our nation to Him. Amen.
I have some closing comments, but I do want to thank our sponsors again, LifeBridge Church here in Windermere, Florida. Unbelievable job you guys have done being gracious, so thank you very much. myfaithvotes.com, starting with Dr. Carson and all of the staff that you all have come. Thank you for live streaming this on your website. If you are watching via Facebook Live or even here in the audience, please help us push this content out. This Facebook Live feed will be available on the My Faith Votes Facebook page and also on the website, myfaithvotes.com. And then finally, I'd like to close by presenting some questions that I believe that all Christians should be asking themselves before they vote. First, did you pray and think before making a decision regarding the 2006 presidential election? I mean, really pray and really think. I must admit, I've done a lot of thinking. I haven't done a lot of praying. I was convicted by this hashtag that was presented to me, which I think is a great one to think about the election with. Are you really thinking also about the implications to our republic, to our Constitution, in fact, to our civilization as a result of the choice that you make? Number two, are you really taking your vote seriously, as if it really matters, or you're casting it somewhat casually, knowing that it's just one in other millions of votes? In other words, if you knew that your one vote would be the vote, the deciding vote, that would directly or indirectly elect one of the two major candidates, would you still vote the same way? Number three, have you based your decision based upon me and my feelings and my conscience, or have you based your decision based upon the greater good and the common good of society? Have you considered only the personalities of the election, or are you also looking at party platforms and policies that will result from the various presidencies? Have you considered the logical outcome in light of history of voting for third-party candidates? When you look at a presidential candidate, have you asked yourself which is most likely to support religious liberty, and which candidate is most likely to pick Supreme Court justices that will uphold the Constitution and support its core values? And then finally, have you asked yourself if your vote is more focused on the next 30 days or more focused on the next 30 years? Because it will matter. As I said before, it's pretty clear that we live in a fallen world, but the best advice I think all of us could give to all of you listening to this forum today is look at the facts, make the best choice, and then we simply trust in God. Or as we've said today, pray, think, vote. Thank you, and God bless you, and could you please give a hand to our panelists today? Thank you very much. Thank you, Billy. Appreciate it.